Welcome in. Today we're diving into an explainer on one of the most unbelievable legal twists we've seen in a really long time. Just when we all thought the book was completely closed on the Idaho 4 case, we're suddenly looking at massive new contradictions, sudden claims of absolute innocence, and some truly wild insider bombshells coming from the absolute last place you'd expect. Let's just jump right into it.
Okay, so get this. In a total bombshell statement first reported by the New York Times, Bryan Kohberger is now speaking out from a maximum security prison, and he is making his stance crystal clear. He said, and I quote, "My actual innocence is my truth, and the plea, hinged on by false promises and blatant disinformation, must be withdrawn." I mean, hearing a convicted murderer do a complete 180 like this, it totally flips the script on what literally everyone thought was a close case.
To really grasp just how wild this reversal actually is, we kind of need to look at the timeline. So back in December 2022, Kohberger is arrested in Pennsylvania. Then, fast forward to July 2025, he takes a plea deal to avoid the death penalty, right? He gets 4 consecutive life sentences, 0 chance of parole. But then, skip ahead to July 2026, barely 13 months later, he drops a handwritten petition trying to withdraw that exact same guilty plea.
Which brings us to Section 1, a shocking reversal, the fight for post-conviction relief.
So, in this new handwritten petition, Kohberger is taking aim squarely at his own legal representation. He's officially alleging ineffective counsel, pointing the finger right at his defense team, which was led by Ann Taylor. He's essentially claiming his guilty plea wasn't voluntary at all, but rather coerced. He says his lawyers made these false promises about what his prison conditions would be like, and that they fed him fabricated, absolutely terrifying descriptions of death row, basically just to pressure him into taking the deal.
Let's move to Section 2, the stargazing alibi and the defense's original stance. First off, let's remind ourselves what the defense was actually up against before that plea. Former FBI agent and author Chris Whitcomb pointed out that the prosecution had 3 really massive pillars of evidence hanging over Kohberger. Pillar 1, that infamous video footage of a white Hyundai Elantra on the Moscow-Pullman highway. Pillar 2, deep cell phone data analysis by the FBI that connected him to the area of the house. And Pillar 3, of course, the highly publicized DNA found on the knife sheath snap that was left right at the crime scene.
Now, the clash between the two sides before the guilty plea was just immense. Kohberger's lawyers had actually filed documents claiming his alibi was that he was simply out for a late-night drive. They said he was south of Pullman near Wawawai Park, just hiking, running, looking at the moon and stars. But the state's evidence painted a completely different picture. They argued that his cell phone mysteriously dropped off the network entirely right around the exact time of the murders, only to suddenly reappear a bit later south of Moscow.
All right, on to Section 3, an insider's bombshell, the Trojan horse twist.
Okay, so enter Cy Ray. Cy Ray is a highly experienced digital forensics expert and a former homicide investigator. But here is the absolute kicker. He was originally hired by Bryan Kohberger's own defense team to analyze the digital data. Fast forward to today, Ray is out there publicly stating that, based on the data he himself reviewed, Kohberger is 100% guilty. It is so incredibly rare for a former defense expert to publicly flip on their own client with such explosive allegations. He even went so far as to say he wants the death penalty put right back on the table so a jury can actually see this evidence.
And this new data Ray is talking about? It completely shatters that whole stargazing alibi. Ray claims that hidden mobile advertiser data from Kohberger's specific phone, which was a Samsung, absolutely destroys the defense's original narrative. We're talking extremely precise GPS coordinates that place the device right on top of the victim's residence.
Which leads us nicely into Section 4, the digital evidence battle, covering phones, data, and DNA.
Ray's forensic claims here are honestly chilling. He explains that because Samsung phones come loaded with these super chatty apps that constantly pull precise third-party mobile advertiser IDs, the location data is actually way more accurate than just your standard cell tower pings. Because of this data, Ray claims Madison Mogen was Kohberger's specific target. He alleges the data proves Kohberger was actually stalking the victims, mapping out their routes together in Pullman, and even at a local A&W restaurant. But the most shocking part? Ray says there are 5 separate, highly precise GPS hits locating Kohberger's phone physically inside the King Road living room on occasions prior to the murders.
So, you're probably wondering, right? If the cell data is really that utterly damning, why on earth would the defense file an appeal? Well, it all circles back to this concept right here, investigative genetic genealogy, or IgG.
This is basically the practice of taking crime scene DNA and combining it with those public genetic ancestry databases to build a family tree and track down suspects. Severi firmly believes that the FBI's use of IgG in this case, which crucially bypassed a traditional search warrant, is the real hidden target behind the defense's massive push for post-conviction relief.
Ray actually theorizes that Kohberger's team is running a highly rehearsed, long-term strategy here. Their ultimate goal? Delay the case. Ray suggests they are essentially just buying time, holding out hope that a related case eventually makes its way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. Think about it. If the Supreme Court were to rule that investigative genetic genealogy requires a strict search warrant, which the FBI definitely didn't have when they first searched those genealogy databases for this case, that entire foundational block of DNA evidence could potentially be thrown out completely.
Let's look at Section 5, the legal reality check, unwinding a guilty plea.
This all begs one massive, glaring question. Can a guilty plea actually be reversed after it's been totally finalized in open court? It's a critical thing to ask because Kohberger is staring down an absolutely gigantic uphill battle right now.
To really understand the path he's trying to take, we have to talk about post-conviction relief. See, when Kohberger originally pleaded guilty, he explicitly signed away his standard appeal rights. That's pretty normal. However, thanks to a 2019 U.S. Supreme Court precedent actually involving the state of Idaho, a case called Garza v. Idaho, a defendant always retains the right to challenge their conviction on very specific constitutional grounds, things like ineffective assistance of counsel. So this isn't your standard appeal, it's a direct constitutional challenge claiming his Sixth Amendment rights were violated.
But as you can probably guess, just having the right to file a petition doesn't magically mean it's going to work. Former FBI agent Chris Whitcomb perfectly summed up the general legal consensus on this, saying, "I think the odds are very, very long against him. It is a very, very long shot." And he hit the nail on the head. Trying to withdraw a guilty plea after you've already stood up and confirmed it under oath is incredibly, almost impossibly difficult in the American justice system.
And the main reason it's so hard is because of what went down in July 2025. Judge Stephen Hippler thoroughly questioned Kohberger right there in open court. The judge specifically asked him, under oath, to confirm that he was satisfied with his attorneys, that the plea was completely voluntary, and most importantly, he asked, "Are you pleading guilty because you are guilty?" Kohberger looked right at the judge and clearly answered, yes. Overturning that sworn, on-the-record admission, that is the colossal hurdle this new petition has to somehow clear.
So what does this all mean for us watching this unfold? Well, it leaves us with this final, really provocative thought. What actually happens if he manages to win this long-shot petition? If Bryan Kohberger successfully withdraws his plea, that original deal is completely shredded, gone. That means he will face trial all over again, and prosecutors are almost certainly going to put the death penalty right back on the table. By breaking his silence and fighting this conviction now, Kohberger is essentially taking the ultimate high-stakes gamble with his very own life. Thanks so much for tuning into this explainer. This is obviously a totally fascinating, super complex situation, and you better believe we'll be watching it very, very closely.